Thank you so much for joining us today for Building for the Future, investing in climate change mitigation and adaptation in schools. I'm John King, and I've had the privilege of serving as United States Secretary of Education during the Obama administration. Today, I co-chair K-12 Climate Action with the Aspen Institute alongside Governor Christine Todd Whitman, who you'll hear from in a minute. K-12 Climate Action is dedicated to mobilizing the education sector for climate change solutions. With nearly 100,000 schools across the country using 480,000 school buses, schools must play a bigger role in our strategy to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And in supporting our schools to advance sustainability, we can prepare our students for the challenges and opportunities of the future. With K-12 Climate Action, we are working with youth leaders, education leaders, environmental leaders, and policymakers to develop an action plan to support our education sector in this work. Through our listening tour, we've heard from people on the ground about innovative approaches to address climate impacts at schools, and we've learned about the critical need and opportunity to invest in school infrastructure to accelerate this work. I'll now turn this over to Governor Whitman.
Thank you, Secretary King. I'm Christine Todd Whitman. As the former governor of New Jersey and administrator of the EPA during the George W. Bush administration, I've seen firsthand how the climate crisis is affecting our nation. Whether it's flooding, droughts, or wildfires, climate change is here, and it's calling on all of us to rise to the challenges and be part of the solution. We cannot wait to act, and we must have support from all sectors and all levels of government to be part of the solution. Investing in our school infrastructure, buildings, grounds, and transportation can help us create jobs now, improve health and learning opportunities, strengthen community resilience, and reduce the footprint of the large public sector. We are excited to elevate opportunities for school infrastructure investment to contribute to climate solutions in this two-day event in participation with the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, the Sierra Club, and the World Resources Institute. Our first session today, we will have the opportunities to learn more about improving sustainability in our school buildings and school grounds. We will also hear more about how different levels of government can be critical partners in supporting this work. Thank you for joining us today and helping us build lasting change to advance a more sustainable society.
Hi, I'm Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia's 3rd District, and I chair the House Committee on Education and Labor. I want to first thank K-12 Climate Action, the Aspen Institute, and all of the co-sponsors for your commitment to providing healthier schools and a healthier environment for our children. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the fragility of our nation's school infrastructure. And as schools continue to reopen, millions of students and staff are returning to crumbling and unsafe facilities. According to a recent report from the Government Accountability Office, more than half of all school districts need to repair or replace major systems in more than half of their buildings. This includes 4 in 10 districts that need to repair or replace the ventilation systems in at least half of their buildings. The CDC has identified proper ventilation as a critical element for reopening schools safely. But the need to repair our schools existed long before the pandemic. For decades, students and educators in low-income communities have suffered in schools with asbestos, contaminated water, and mold. In fact, the average school building is more than 45 years old. Crumbling schools not only hurt students' abilities to learn and stay healthy, outdated facilities from 100-year-old boiler heaters to inefficient lighting systems also hurt our environment, contributing to a bleaker future for the next generation. In response, President Biden's infrastructure proposal, the American Jobs Plan, includes $100 billion for school infrastructure, split between grants and bonding authority. This proposal draws from the Reopen and Rebuild America Schools Act of 2021, which I introduced to ensure that students and educators have access to safe and sustainable school buildings. My legislation would provide $100 billion in grants and an additional $30 billion in bonding authority to help high-poverty schools cover the costs of updating their facilities. This funding would go towards replacing dangerously outdated ventilation systems, improving the sustainability of school kitchens, and covering the costs of other improvements. It is critical that Congress provides $100 billion in grants to support schools in low-income communities. So in the coming months, I will continue to work with the Biden administration to secure the full investment in school infrastructure that our students and staff need. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you toward our shared goal, and that is ensuring that America's schools are on the cutting edge, not only of educating students, but also providing them with a healthy and sustainable planet. Thank you.
Welcome to this panel. I'm Rachel Golden. I'm director of Sierra Club's Clean Buildings campaign, and we are so excited to have such an excellent panel today to help us better understand the opportunities to invest in our country's school buildings to create healthy, sustainable learning environments. I'm joined today by Tim Cole, who's the Sustainability Officer for Virginia Beach City Public Schools, Wick Knox, who is a principal at VMDO Architects, an architecture firm which has built net zero schools, Brian Kennedy, who is the Director of Policy, Strategy, and Communications with the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers, and Tish Tablan, who leads Solar for All Schools campaign with Generation 180. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm going to start the panel with a question to all of the panelists. There's nearly 100,000 public schools across the country, and our schools just received a D+ score on America's Infrastructure Report Card. Can each of you share a little more about the work that you're doing and why you think improving school infrastructure is important? Why don't we start off with Tish? Thank you.
Hi, hello, I'm Tish Tablan. Thanks so much for having me. I work for a nonprofit organization, Generation 180, and we're based in Charlottesville, Virginia. And my organization name really emphasizes the urgency of the climate crisis we're facing. So our power generation needs to make a 180 away from fossil fuels, and we are the generation that has to do it. So I lead our national campaign called Solar for All Schools, and we're working to provide access and resources to nationwide pre-K through 12 public and private schools to make the transition to clean energy. So prior to my work with Generation 180, I was a public school teacher for 6 years. And I can share some of my personal experience that speaks to why infrastructure and school facilities are so important for learning, health, and safety of students and staff. So for 4 of those years, I taught at a charter school in East Los Angeles, a Latino community with a prevalence of gangs and a very high dropout rate. And I taught young adult students 18 to 24 years old who enrolled in the school to earn a diploma and gain green collar job skills such as trail building, recycling, tree planting, and green building. But I would give the infrastructure at our site a D minus. I taught the class in a dilapidated trailer separated from the other buildings, which is not uncommon to see at overcrowded schools. And then being isolated presented safety concerns. And on my second day on the job, someone on campus rode by on a bike shooting a gun towards the buildings. And we were kind of by ourselves off away from the rest of the staff. Also, just trying to teach in a small room with little insulation and a noisy window unit, it just created comfort issues and distractions for students who already had trouble succeeding in traditional classroom settings. So all of this is to say that investing in safe, healthy, high-performing buildings matters for schools, and in order to help schools be able to do its job of educating students. So my current work is focusing on upgrading energy infrastructure at school facilities. And this is important because energy is typically the second highest expense for schools after personnel. So with improved infrastructure, we can bring down those operating costs significantly and transfer money that we're sending to the utilities back into student learning. So during this past year, we saw school districts grappling with how to operate with budgets that were decimated in the wake of the pandemic. And then to add on to this, schools saw drops in enrollment, which further reduced the funds coming into schools. So I talked to a lot of school districts that had already invested in energy efficiency and clean energy, and they were more financially resilient and able to weather this financial turbulence. So as a positive example, in Tucson, Arizona, the school district already has 23 megawatts of solar installed across 80 campuses, one of the largest in the country, and they did that with no upfront cost to the district. They're currently saving $1.1 million in energy costs per year, and they expect to see $43 million in energy savings over 20 years. In addition, Arizona is a state that ranks almost last in the country for spending per student. So that superintendent in Tucson will tell you that every last penny of those energy savings allows them to pay for their critical capital needs, like from buses to laptops to building repairs and sports equipment.
Thank you so much, Tish. We'll go to Brian now.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Brian Kennedy, and I work mostly on legislation and policy for the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers. We represent about 75,000 bricklayers, tile setters, and other workers in the masonry industry. And, if you think about a school building, that's a lot of what schools are made of. So investing in our school infrastructure has been a legislative priority for us for a long time. And obviously, schools are critically important facilities. They're centers of a lot of activity, but most importantly, they're where our young people go to get their education. And we believe that we owe it to them and to the staff and teachers at the schools to make sure they're going to facilities that are healthy and safe and conducive to learning. And that's simply not the case right now. We have old facilities that are in great need of repair, and it's time for us to step up and do something about it.
Thank you, Brian. Let's hear from Tim now.
Thanks, Rachel. So my name's Tim Cole. I'm the Sustainability Officer with the Virginia Beach City Public Schools, and my background is architecture. So I lean heavily toward the built environment, and that's the way I come into this. And so, but since I've come to work for the school division, that's kind of branched into not only the built environment, but what we do as a division, our practices throughout the division, and then how that's kind of tied into curriculum and the educational side of that. And so if you think about it, the students and staff that are in these buildings, they spend more waking hours in a school building than they do in their home. So aside from things like great indoor air quality and natural daylighting and all those things that we like to see in a building, we also want these spaces to be inspirational spaces, because we're developing these future kind of innovative leaders that we want. And if they don't see physical examples of this stuff, how can they be the innovators that we want them to be? And so a good example would be, when we program a new school building and we get all the teachers together and we ask them to describe, their ideal space, what it would be, they typically start to just describe their same old classroom that they've been in, because that's all they've ever been exposed to. So it's important for us to develop these buildings and these spaces that are creative spaces that inspire these people to kind of think differently than they've always thought. And so that's where we're coming at it, from a school division perspective.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Wick, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Thanks, Rachel. My name is Wick Knox. I'm an architect in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I specialize in the design of K-12 facilities, and my firm specializes in the design of educational facilities. It's tough to follow Tim Cole, but I want to reinforce a few things that he said about why school infrastructure is important. Tim said that kids spend more time at the school than they do at their homes. If you also think about the big picture, about somewhere between a third to a quarter of a person's life is spent in an educational building, right? So the idea of health and wellness is really a critical piece, and having environments that are pollutant-free, chemical-free, have fresh air, and have natural light is just an essential to raising healthy people. I think in the pandemic, every American has a better appreciation of the fact that where we learn matters, right? That the work that's done by educators and teachers is incredibly hard, and that the physical environment is never neutral. It's either working for you or it's working against you. And so why would we not take every opportunity we have to make that environment the most stimulating and interesting and healthy that it can be? So not only where we learn matters, but also how we start matters, right? That 1/3 to 1/4 of your life is the first third or first quarter of your life. So it's very important to set expectations early that it's possible to have real visceral connections to place, and to have places that honor the work of the teachers and feel important to the students. We at the end of the day, we want to design buildings where teachers and students can't wait to get to in the morning, and they don't want to leave in the afternoon, right? And then when it comes to sustainability, from net zero to health and wellness to water, whatever the issue might be, it's important to set an example that what is possible already exists, right? Don't tell me that you can't have a net zero school. I went to an elementary school that was net zero, right? So setting those examples early and providing for our young people is how we're going to change the world.
Thank you so much. You all have such compelling stories and really important points. Really appreciate it. Let's dig in a bit deeper now. Tim, I'd love to hear from you about your work in Virginia. We know that Virginia Beach City Public Schools are a leader in the country for sustainable schools, but can you take us back to the beginning? How did you get interested in the work? And how did you build the sustainability initiatives in your district? And where have you seen the most benefits?
So, when I was in private practice, before I came to work for the school division in the 90s, when LEED was a pilot program, we had a client come in and he wanted us to design a building for them based on this LEED standard. And I really didn't know anything about it. And so that's how I kind of was introduced to it. We designed this building for the National Weather Service up in Caribou, Maine. And then when I came to work for the school division a little over 20 years ago, they had been building these elementary school prototypes all across the division. They were just the same cookie cutter building everywhere. And so, we talked about, hey, let's see if we can tweak one of these prototypes and get a LEED certification and see what's involved with that. And so we did that, and Hermitage Elementary School became the first LEED certified elementary school in the state of Virginia, and it was a fairly painless process. And so we decided that that's where we're going to go moving forward. And then around right as that building was getting ready to open, I was called back on active duty, and so I was gone for about 16 months. And when I came back off of active duty, I asked the folks, how are we doing with the LEED building stuff? And no one would make eye contact with me. They're staring at their feet, so nothing really had been done. So we decided to come up with a much more kind of formal process for that. And so we came up with these three kind of general goals for us. One was we're going to design sustainable infrastructure. And then another is we're going to integrate these sustainability practices throughout the school division. And a third one is we're going to educate the public about this. And so I always describe being the sustainability guy in a school division is like guerrilla warfare. You get dropped in behind enemy lines. You're a small group of people in a hostile environment. And so you're trying to gain allies within the local indigenous population, and you work with those folks. And then eventually you kind of, win hearts and minds through your actions and stuff that you've done. And so that's what we've done there. We developed a little committee of folks within all the different departments that look at sustainability from their departments and what they need to do to go forward. And in the beginning, there was a lot of, you had to explain to everybody what sustainability was, what the definition was. And even nowadays, people still, come across different definitions for that. So aside from just the standard definition of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, we define it as a triple bottom line. So you're just trying to balance social, economic, and environmental outcomes. That's what sustainability means to us. And so I think what that allowed us to do in a very conservative area, we're one of the most conservative cities in the country, is it allowed folks, if you're a fiscal conservative, you could come into the discussion through that leg of the stool right there. If you're into social issues, you can come into it that way. And obviously, if you're an environmentalist, you can come into it that way. But it allowed everybody to have kind of a seat at the table. And it's allowed us to move forward in a really conservative environment. And so now we have about 2 million square feet of LEED building space. We're finishing up 2 new buildings right now. We're getting ready to start design on 2 new LEED buildings. So we'll have 15 LEED buildings by the time we're done with that. So we're slowly building our portfolio. And then we're slowly educating people about what this triple bottom line is. And so we still have a long way to go. We've done educational sessions through the executive leadership and all the directors within the school division. But, by the time I retire, if you could ask a student to define the triple bottom line and they could tell you what that means, I'll be a happy camper, because it goes a long way towards kind of developing that connection with students where they start to understand the interconnectedness of all of these systems. And with that, you're starting to raise students who are a little more empathetic to their surroundings. So I think that's a big thing that we all need, as a culture in general. And that's my Reader's Digest version of what we're doing here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim, for being an early pioneer in sustainable schools. Wick, I imagine you might want to build upon a little bit of what Tim said. Can you tell us more about net zero energy schools? What are they? What are the benefits? And how can districts work with architects to create net zero schools? What are some options for schools to make progress towards net zero energy when they're retrofitting their buildings?
Okay, it's a lot of questions there. So let's start with the definition. So net zero is a term that's being used more and more often, and I think people are a little more familiar with it. But the idea of net is that at the end of the day, you want to take your total annual usage of energy and your consumption, and you want to balance it out with your production. And if you produce as much as you consume, you net out to zero after 12 months. So net zero school is a school that produces all of its own energy. And of course, it's it's really hard to get that math to hit exactly right. So, most of the schools that are net zero are actually net positive. So they are producing a little bit more electricity than they are pulling from the grid. And of course, all the electrons that they're pushing back onto the grid are clean energy. So if you have a school that is all electric, that doesn't use any fossil fuels at all, no natural gas, no propane, and at least from the utility operation side, you're also carbon neutral in that sense, that you're putting back clean energy for more clean energy than you're taking off the grid. So, and more, when we first started this, it was even a challenge with a lot of utility providers to even have a net meter. A net meter is one simply that'll run in two directions. It'll spin this way and it'll spin that way. And that's the world's changed quite a bit since then. And there's a lot more opportunities to design and build this way. The benefits of net zero schools there's a lot of them, and I think they're tied to the triple bottom line that Tim talks about. You can there's a lot of options for putting solar on buildings. As Tish said, you can either buy the panels or you can do them through a power purchase arrangement where it's not quite as simple as renting your roof space, but it's something similar to that. So you could either have no upfront cost and produce clean energy, or you could buy the panels and produce all your electricity and save all that money over time. Discovery Elementary, which was the first net zero school we did that opened in 2015, saves the district around $100,000 a year. So it's in its 6th year of operation. $600,000 is a lot of money for a school district. So that's a lot of cost avoidance that makes a lot of sense. And then I think the bigger benefit is, again, showing what's possible and demonstrating, especially if you make the data available to the educators and the students, that this can be done. It can be done now. It can be done with the technology that we have, and it's achievable.
Great, thank you, Wick. I'm glad you brought up the importance of solar. We'd love to hear a little bit more from Tish on the role of solar in schools. So Tish, can you share with us more about the current state of solar for schools? Why is solar a beneficial option for schools? And as schools consider infrastructure investments, how should they be thinking about solar?
Yes, thanks for your questions, and thanks for the nice warm handoff, Wick. So my organization decided to work on solar at schools mostly because of the potential that we see that schools have to make a difference. So research tells us that solar is contagious. So when your neighbor goes solar, that is the best way to predict if I will go solar. And schools can do that in a positive way as well. So there's a school in every community, and schools have the power to lead and normalize this transition to clean energy throughout the country and model the benefits of clean energy for students, families, staff, and neighboring schools. So we conducted research last year to tally up all the schools in the country, or tally up all the solar on schools throughout the country. And at the end of 2019, we found that less than 6% of all the nationwide schools, that's K-12 public and private schools, have any kind of solar. And only 16% of school districts have solar. So we do have a long way to go to meet our country's climate goals. However, the good news is that clean energy adoption is growing fast at schools. Our data also showed that in the 5-year period between 2014 and 2019, the amount of solar installed at schools grew almost 2.5 times, and the number of schools that went solar grew by 81%. So it's growing quickly, and with the federal government that's providing leadership, goals, and funding for clean energy infrastructure, I'm optimistic that this growth will continue. And investing in clean energy infrastructure at schools has a multitude of benefits. I already mentioned cost-saving benefits earlier, but adding solar technology on site also provides a wealth of hands-on STEM and vocational learning opportunities. And there's so many bright spots I could point out at the 2 net zero schools that Wick and his team at VMDO designed in my home state of Virginia. And actually it's featured right here behind me on the panel. But they installed these amazing cutting edge rooftop solar labs that allowed the students to go outside, touch, test, and experiment with with various types of solar technology. I'd love to see that at every school. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Elementary students are working with university researchers to study agrovoltaics, which is the science of growing food under the shade of solar panels. So they're finding different plants respond better by having some shade throughout the day. Another great example in New York City, that all the students receive some kind of clean energy education in the curriculum. And then high school students have the opportunity to get training in solar PV design and installation. And they now offer a summer internship with the solar companies who are installing solar on the school buildings throughout the city. So these students that attend the schools then get a chance to install solar on the schools that they may have attended. It's a really cool system. So kind of back to your last question, if you're a school district that's just now looking into solar and other clean energy infrastructure, the first question I hear almost always is, how do we afford it? And our research found that nearly 80% of solar installed on nationwide schools was actually funded by a third party, and therefore it didn't come out of the district budget. So only 14% of solar was funded and owned by the schools out of their budget or bonds. Another 7% was grants. So the most common ways that schools afford solar is through a power purchase agreement. And that way the solar developer pays for, owns, and maintains the solar array with typically no upfront cost to the district. And then the district purchases the energy from the developer, typically at a rate lower than what they would pay the utility. So that's how they can see immediate energy savings.
Thank you, Tish. That makes a lot of sense. So we've now heard about some of the successes and opportunities to support school infrastructure for students, educators, and schools. Brian, I was wondering if you can share with us more about how school infrastructure investments can benefit the workforce and the economy.
Sure. The short answer is job creation. And we sometimes say that the most important thing for our economy, or the three most important things for our economy, are jobs, jobs, and jobs. And the kind of investment that, for example, is in the Reopen and Rebuild American Schools Act, according to the Economic Policy Institute, that would create more than 2 million jobs. And a lot of those are good paying jobs for bricklayers and tile setters, but it's a kind of investment that ripples through the economy, and suppliers in the local area and other economic activity that surrounds the investment does a lot to stimulate growth, creates more demand in our economy. And investment in school infrastructure, like most infrastructure investment, is the kind of investment that actually goes a long way towards paying for itself because of that growth it causes in our economy and the resulting increase in revenues.
Thank you so much, Brian. I have one last question for all the panelists. What would you like to see local, state, and federal governments do to support investment in school infrastructure to help build healthy, sustainable, and resilient schools? Tim, why don't we start with you this time?
So I think one of the main things we could do is they could lead by example. So at the federal and state level, they could prioritize funding so that it goes toward projects around sustainable building infrastructure. And then at the state level, there's a lot of code issues that they could kind of implement that would drive what we do in the built environment side of the house. And in the military, we used to always say either lead, follow, or get out of the way. We say that a lot more colorfully than what I just said right there. But I think it's true. We want folks to set the example and lead the way.
Thank you, Tim. Would like to hear from Tish next.
Sure, this is fun. I get to say my wish list for policies. And at the federal level, I think we're excited to see some great proposals already happening that would invest in clean infrastructure at schools. So Biden's American Jobs Plan, he just recently announced, is planning to invest $20 billion to convert 20% of the school bus fleet to electric. There is a Clean Commute for Kids Act that's proposed in the House and Senate that would put $25 billion for electric school bus conversions over the next 10 years. So it's an exciting opportunity to invest in clean transportation infrastructure for schools as well as the buildings. I'd love to continue to see more incentives for solar and storage. We have an extension on the federal tax credits. Love to see more for storage. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest policy that would make a difference for me would be putting a price on carbon. And there are a few different models for doing that, but we've seen California do that, lead the way already. So we've already seen it be effective at the state level. And we know it's helped California to become the clean energy leader that it is. So in our own data, we've seen that California has more solar on schools than the next 5 best states combined. So they're really leading the way. And if you talk to schools in California, they just have lots of state funding options that we don't see in other states for solar, for storage, for school buses. It really gives school districts more financing options and lets them make decisions that can work best for their district. Of course, I mentioned PPAs. That's really the state policy we've been focusing on most. There are 29 states plus DC that allow third-party power purchase agreements. West Virginia is the newest one to be added to the list just this month. My organization was working to help pass a policy to allow power purchase agreements in Florida for schools. And unfortunately, we were unsuccessful. So that's where we're focusing our state efforts. But what we've seen in my home state of Virginia is that once PPAs were allowed in 2014, that the solar capacity on schools grew by over 300% within a 5 or 6 year period, from about 30 kilowatts to now over 30 megawatts of solar in schools. And then finally, at the local level, we'd love to see more school districts and localities making commitments to 100% clean energy. So just before Earth Day, Miami-Dade Public Schools committed to 100% clean energy by 2030. So it's the 4th largest school district in the country, and it's the first in the state to make this kind of commitment. And right now, the district is spending $64 million on energy each year. So imagine if that district had a 0 electric bill from going solar, then that's $64 million that can go back towards education.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tish. I'd love to hear from Brian next.
Sure. I think it's important that government at all levels step up to the plate and do their part. For way too long, most of the burden has fallen on local areas, and many local areas just don't have the resources to address the needs, and that leads to massive inequality, and that's not good for anyone. States can play a role, and some states do, but the federal government, I think, has really dropped the ball, and it's time for the federal government to really stand up and invest some resources in our school infrastructure. Tish mentioned some of the proposals that are out there. President Biden is very supportive of doing something in this area, and we have Chairman Bobby Scott in the House moving a proposal along with Senator Reid in the Senate. These are great signs. I think we have more momentum than we've seen in a long time, but it's really long past due, and I hope we can get something accomplished now.
Thank you, Brian. And Wick, will you bring us home?
Sure. I think that the leading by example point is very relevant here. In most counties across the country, the local government, between the school board and the local government, they own the most roof square footage, right? More so than any individual big box retailer. So there's a big opportunity to get solar on those roofs, and lots of ways to do it, as Tish mentioned. I think that the energy code has caught up to where we need to be, and now it's just a matter of enforcing the code. Most places around the country do not enforce the energy code. It's something we haven't really learned yet in terms of inspections. Other things I think that could occur is starting in a very real and meaningful way to get sustainability criteria into our procurement process when we make new buildings, right? We could put it into not just in the RFP as a goal, but put it in the actual scoring criteria that's used when we do an open and fair public procurement process. Pre-qualify contractors based on performance of not just how they delivered a building and walked away, but how it operated, right? At the end of the day, that's really the disconnect I think government can help to bridge, which is the problem between first costs and operating costs. It's usually completely different departments in a school system that are in charge of those two things. And the people that are in charge of building the school care about getting it on schedule and under budget, right? The operating costs really aren't a concern. And that's where it's hard to justify even a meager increase in some systems that will pay off in a really a no-brainer of a calculus down the road. So finding a way to, whether it's through funding mechanisms for schools that are tied to operating costs or other things that bridges that gap between funding sources would help us a lot as a country, I believe.
Thank you, Wick. This has been a fantastic panel. I so appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today. Today we heard from some of the nation's leading experts in sustainable schools. We learned how sustainable net zero schools are critical, not just for climate change, mitigation, and adaptation, but also for the health and wellness of children and teachers, and for job growth in the economy. So thank you all for joining. We're really excited to see the school infrastructure, clean energy, and workforce investments in Biden's America's Jobs Plan. And let's get this done. Let's continue to move forward with strong policies at the federal, state, and local level. We can do this. We're making a tremendous amount of progress, and we have a short window of opportunity here. So thank you all for your tremendous work and for the panel today. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Carlos Curbelo, and I'm a member of K-12 Climate Action, a wonderful initiative of the Aspen Institute. Together with my fellow commissioners, we're working on identifying common sense solutions to help our schools, thousands and thousands of schools throughout the country, mitigate for climate change, meaning reduce their carbon footprint, adapt for climate change, and that's especially important in our part of the world in South Florida, and then also help teach children about climate change and help prepare today's generations, rising generations, for the jobs of tomorrow. So today we're very fortunate to be joined by Mayor Francis Suarez. He is the mayor of the city of Miami, someone I know well, and someone who for a number of years now has been a great leader when it comes to shining a light on the challenge of climate change, what it means for local communities like his, the city of Miami, and what we can all do to address one of the greatest challenges that humanity has ever faced. So, Mayor, thanks so much for joining us today.
Congressman, it's an honor to be here with you, and it's always a pleasure to spend time with you and to participate in forums like this with you.
So, you have pledged that the city will be carbon neutral. I'm not sure if that's a 2050 or a 2040 pledge. In South Florida, we just got a new pledge about a week ago, and that was from Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Our local school district has set the goal. It'll be difficult, but they have set the goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. Given your leadership in this space, when you saw that news, I mean, tell us about that. How important is that as the city of Miami and other cities in the state of Florida, throughout the country and the world, set these ambitious climate goals?
Well, like you said in the intro, Congressman, this is a generational goal. This is an existential threat. And frankly, one of the things that I like about the way it's being discussed now is it's being given the appropriate threat level, which it's being described as a national security issue. And frankly, through my work as chair of the Environment Committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and as the vice chair of the Global Council on Adaptation, for which I'm the only U.S. mayor on the council, I think it's imperative that we look at the severe ramifications of not dealing with our climate issues immediately. As you've said, I was blessed through the intervention of the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, to have been invited into C40. We're one of the few cities that have become part of C40, and we did take a carbon neutrality pledge, and it's very exciting for me on Earth Day to be able to issue our carbon neutrality plan. And it's a 2050 plan because we were given a little bit of extra time, even though we're in C40, because we had joined a little later. But we do pledge to reduce our carbon footprint by 60% by the year 2036. So understanding that a city is a slightly larger endeavor than just a government, right? We're not just talking about the city's government. We're talking about the city as a whole, which includes many of the buildings from the school board. I think it's wonderful what the school board has done. I think not only do we have to look at mitigation, which is obviously part of our carbon neutrality plan. Not only do we have to look at adaptation, which is part of our Miami Forever bond plan, which is a $200 million resiliency plan to make Miami the most water resilient city on the planet. But frankly, I think we have to use this opportunity and technology to start looking at reversals, to start looking at how do we reverse the damage that's already been done. I mean, some of the estimates that we've seen from my work on the climate adaptation board and commission really paint a bleak picture, even if we're able to mitigate at levels that we think are possible. So for us, I think we have to do more as a generation. The beauty of it is the next generation, the Generation Zers, are really pushing us to do more because they realize that they're going to inherit whatever planet it is that we leave them with.
So, Mayor, as we think about this transition from traditional energy sources to clean energy, obviously the transportation sector is a major topic and a major challenge. School districts, of course, operate a lot of buses. Most of these buses are diesel, and now a lot of school districts have started initiatives to move to electric buses. Now, it's wonderful to have an electric bus fleet, but you really need the infrastructure for that. Do you think there are ways that maybe cities like Miami can partner with school districts to make sure that that infrastructure that the school districts and really anyone else who wants to electrify their fleets would have to rely on, that's available to them? Because that's a major concern as school districts and others are looking to transition.
Absolutely. In fact, I feel like we have a responsibility to do that. I actually have been in talks with a company called Electrion. And what the company does is it electrifies the roadways so that you can have electric buses that are running on electrified roadways, obviously at no risk to pedestrians. And they're actually charging as they drive. So they don't even have to be stationed. They can have 1/10 the size of a battery because they don't have to have long trips. It's not like a 300-mile charge and then at the end of the day recharge. So they can charge as they go. And I think that there's going to be a lot of technologies like that. We're also obviously talking to companies like the Boring Company, which provides underground transportation using Teslas. And that's something that can be a transportation system for children going to school as a mass transit system. And just to give you context on that technology, the Boring Company is building underground tunnels for $10 million a mile. Our county has proposed an extension of our Metro Mover, right, along 2nd Avenue at a cost of $240 million a mile. So there's an order of magnitude differential that's enormous, and we can use all those additional funds to build more and more transit so that we have a cleaner and more efficient way of getting around our city.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And just to wrap things up here in our brief conversation, I want to ask you, how important are these partnerships? How important is communication between local governments, county government, state governments to get the job done, to get from where we are today to where we all know we need to get, as difficult and as challenging as that will be? You're someone who is considered a important leader here by many of our local mayors, commissioners, elected officials throughout South Florida and the state. How important is it for other mayors in their states, in their communities, to reach out, to build these partnerships, and to really assume that leadership role that is so critical if we're going to get across the finish line in time?
Congressman, I just don't think it's possible to do it any other way. When you think about the jurisdictional challenges, right? There are some things, you just talked about a bi-jurisdictional issue, which is creating an infrastructure to electrify electric buses that are operated by a different jurisdictional partner. You need communication to be able to surmount those jurisdictional issues. When you look at funding, I mean, you got to talk about, the federal government, which is the largest economy in the world, right? The largest company in the world, a multi-trillion-dollar budget. Our state budget, a $90 billion budget. Our local school board, as you know, because you served on that board, a multi-billion-dollar budget. Our county, a $9 billion budget. Our city, $1.1 billion. So when you bring these macro economies together, you can provide scale and funding so that not any one industry or not any one organization has to bear the total brunt of a massive capital cost. So I think communication, interaction, best practices, those are things that should be shared. And the only way to do that is through communication and collaboration.
Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having this conversation with K-12 Climate Action and the Aspen Institute. And we're so grateful to our audience, everyone who has taken the time to listen.
It's been a privilege to share these thoughts with you and the Aspen Institute.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to have you here for this panel and learning more about how we can invest in our school grounds and our infrastructure of our school grounds to help address climate change and improve community health as well. My name is Laura Shifter. I'm a senior fellow with the Aspen Institute leading the K-12 Climate Action Initiative. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Sadia McKeith, the Director of Community Health for the Trust for Public Land, and Kenneth Varner, the Community Engagement Manager with the Healthy Schools campaign. They are out there leading this work on the ground, so it's great to be able to be here and have a conversation with them today. So just to get this started, what we know is our school grounds make up an estimated 2 million acres of land across the country and have a profound impact on student well-being and the health of their surrounding neighborhoods. Can each of you share a little bit more about the work that you do and why you think improving school grounds is really important? So Sadia, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Laura, for the wonderful introduction. Pleasure to be here with you, Kenneth. So I work for the Trust for Public Land, and we create parks and protect land for people, ensuring healthy, livable communities for generations to come. And as a sort of a health person, I know that where you live, your community conditions inform your health outcomes long before you get to your doctor or your nurse. And so with the green schoolyards work that we do, we know that green schoolyards are the center of community health, climate resilience, and education in a nature-rich hub for really community cohesion. And the work that we do, having developed over 250 schoolyards in 14 communities around the country, we've witnessed these positive impacts through our schoolyards initiative led by Danielle Dank.
Great. Thanks so much. And Kenneth?
Thank you very much for having me. It is definitely a pleasure to be here with all of you. I work with Healthy Schools campaign. Our program that we do is Space to Grow, which is a green schoolyard project. What we do is transform pretty much what you have, like those asphalt fields that a lot of us grew up on, and we change those into green spaces. And we got into that because we are an advocacy organization trying to improve the health and wellness inside the school building. And we advocated for things like physical activity and outdoor learning. And then we realized during that advocacy that those places just didn't exist. Like the amenities, the schools couldn't support those kind of those amenities and those kind of structures. So we transitioned into helping to create those spaces outside. So what we're looking at here is an opportunity gap that a lot of communities have, a lot of communities that are under-resourced and that aren't supported. So when you're, and there's other things that go along with that as well. So the conditions of those communities, you're going to have more poverty, higher crime. So there's going to be, the community isn't going to have that access to those kind of activities that keep themselves healthy. And I'm a firm believer that the health of a community is determined by the health of the children within that community. So I think it's hugely important that we work to create these greener schoolyards, because then if you don't have those other places in the community, those safe places where people can gather, the community itself is going to deteriorate. So we kind of create that venue where community can come together for fellowship outside of school hours, using that space, and then also having a place where children can get that physical activity and get that access to nature, which improves everyone's health.
Great. So I'm hearing you both talk a lot about how, the green schoolyards really help address health. And one of the reasons why we're here with this event today is to talk a little bit about how school infrastructure can really help us address climate change. Sadia, just turning to you for a minute, can you tell us a little bit more about how green schoolyards can help communities kind of adapt and build resilience in preparation for climate change, and then the additional benefits that communities and students get with green schoolyards as well?
Sure. So with regards to climate change, we know that extreme heat is on the rise. And as Kenneth said, when communities are already so vulnerable because they've been so underserved for so long, that they're going to feel a far greater impact of that. Heat waves in the U.S. have essentially tripled compared to the long-term average, and more people are dying because of weather-related events. And what we found that as we look at green schoolyards that turn from these sort of asphalt, more bare spaces with traditionally darker pavement, they don't absorb as much of that heat. And that's really linked to the higher air temperatures, that create the heat island effects. And great trees and vegetation that can be included and incorporated into the schoolyards and the surrounding region of the school are really some of the most cost-effective strategies for cooling air temperatures. There's been sort of research that's demonstrated that shaded surfaces can be, 20 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit cooler with surfaces compared to no shade. And so we really are looking at how we can design infrastructure and resilience, how we can design resilience into our infrastructure through amenities that already exist, like green schoolyards.
Great. And Kenneth, is there anything additional that you've seen in your work in Chicago in terms of how the green schoolyards have built resilience to climate change?
Yeah, so I really think as we're moving into this new world where our climate is changing, it is important to think of schools and other facilities that are in our communities already as a multi-purpose use buildings. And our schoolyards are designed to hold 150,000 gallons worth of water per rainstorm. And that is something that's becoming more and more needed, because we're having these once in a generation rainstorms every year, right? Like it's coming along like every year now. And with Chicago having a closed sewer system and we having all living in this concrete jungle, just asphalt and cement everywhere, all of that just goes directly into the sewer system. And it's just too much for the system to handle. So therefore that ends up flooding the streets, damaging the pipes under the ground, and then also ends up in people's basements. So if we can keep the water where it is long as possible, we can alleviate all of those things. So we really need to rethink how we're handling climate change. And another thing I like to say is, like, as in preparing for this, I was thinking about like climate change, and it's like we really need to understand that we are changing the climate. Like it is what we are doing. This is a human created problem. It is not like the seasons change. It's not going from summer to fall, you know what I mean? Like that is something that's natural. We are changing the environment, and therefore we need to take steps to protect ourselves and future generations, and we need to really take a long look at what we're doing and how we can use the spaces around us to help like mitigate some of the consequences that we are doling out on everyone else.
And so just building off of that, I hear you talking about the multi-purpose space that schools serve and how they really serve communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you've worked to engage students and families and communities in conversations around green schoolyards in Chicago, and kind of how you built partnerships to get things done?
Yes, and what we are kind of most proud of, what I'm most proud of about the program is the community design process. We are in almost 30 schoolyards around Chicago, and each one of them is going to be completely different. And that's through our community design process. We sit down with all the students, the teachers, the administration, community organizations around that particular school, parents, grandparents, all the stakeholders. We bring everyone to the table to help design the schoolyard, because what our main goal is utilization. And so we're not just trying to get buy-in. Like we don't want you to follow along on the journey. We want you to help lead and take charge, because we're eventually going to step away. Like it is something that is built for the community to use. So we want them there at the very beginning. So we're not going to put up basketball courts if no one plays basketball, right? Like no one wants a community. No one in the community wants things that they're not going to use. So they are at the table from the very beginning. We come up with a draft based on what their needs and preferences are, have another meeting with that just to make sure that they know that they were heard, and let us know if there's anything that doesn't quite fit what they were saying. Each community is going to have unique needs and a different perspective. So a lot of times during those meetings, they'll tell you, like, actually, you need to put the court facing this way, or get it away from this corner for these list of reasons, or we have deliveries come this way. So, and this is how we want to use our schoolyard. And when you have people there in the beginning, those people will have pride in that space. They feel heard and they feel listened to, and they will take care of it on their own. And then you have sustainability. And then we also are, through that process, we're building relationships with those people. So then we can also talk about health and wellness and advocacy in other arenas, or like why parents should be involved in speaking to the teachers on a more regular basis, and not just showing up at report card pickup, and what the parent's voice is in the role in the school, and why the administration should really be engaging with the parents. So we build those bridges and kind of break down those barriers that a lot of people can be feeling when it comes to like engaging across different community groups.
Great. And Sadia, can you tell us a little bit about, if somebody's wanting to start looking into the option of expanding a green schoolyard in their community, what would you recommend somebody do first?
Sure. Well, one of the great ways to engage is actually reach out to Trust for Public Land. We have offices across the country, and encourage you to reach out to Danielle Denk, who is our Schoolyards Initiative lead. And if it is in a school district, of course, that we're working with, happy to engage. Another way to sort of get folks excited, folks energized, is to actually work with your city sort of policymakers and your local parks departments, because parks departments are looking to expand access to green space. And this is a fantastic way to do that. Leveraging the green schoolyard after school hours so that you're increasing access to parks and the quality of the park in the area through joint use agreements, etc. But as you get excited, we really want to, think about this not just as sort of a space where we are pursuing green schoolyards as a one-time locally energizing event, but really just deepening this to ensure that it's the standard of practice across neighborhoods, no matter where you live. Every child deserves to have that rich, resilient environment in which they can thrive.
Great. And Kenneth, any recommendations that you would have for folks looking to get started in this work?
Yes, definitely. I would say first thing you want to do is you want to identify your obstacles, so that you're knowing what you are going up against. If it is something that's new to the school district that you're in, you want to develop understanding of that bureaucracy and how their systems work. Have an idea for how these projects are going to be funded. and build a team. I would say if everyone does a little, no one has to do a lot. So don't go it alone, because this can be a uphill battle depending on what school system or administration, or even if the community understands the value that a green schoolyard can bring to the community. Then I'd also say think outside the box. With Space to Grow, one of our two of our capital partners of the project are the two water management facilities in Chicago, which would be the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and the Department of Water Management. And that seems like it might be a bit odd at first, but when you're talking about maintaining the stormwater management, this is also financially, it works to their benefit to reduce the amount of flooding in the neighborhoods that are affecting people's property and public property as well. So I would say when building and looking to build those green schoolyards, think about everyone that would have a specific interest in that, even if it's tangentially. You never know how much someone may be really willing to invest in that.
Great, great. And how do you both think that local, state, and federal policy can help really support and expand access to green schoolyards across the country?
Sure. So I think funding for schoolyards needs to be increased across the board, first and foremost. And in order to do that at the local level, we've been really thinking intentionally about bond measures. So in Oakland, California, we work to increase public funding for schools, including schoolyards, by over $700 million, working locally with the offices there and a diverse set of stakeholders to energize the community around that. At the state level, I think it's important to think about schoolyards in, again, that sort of parks and recreation asset, looking at your sort of Department of Natural Resources, for example, as a potential ally in that process. And at the federal level, we know that the American Rescue Plan Act includes funding to help open school doors. With COVID, we've seen how important having, public space has been to not just our sort of physical health and being able to get out and exercise, but our mental health and our ability to really meet and socialize. And so as we're thinking about that, there's an unprecedented opportunity to really get engaged in school funding at that federal level as well. So I think those are a couple of the highlights at the local, state, and federal level, but there are opportunities abound. So.
And Kenneth, any additional points to add on that?
Yes, all of that. That is, yes. I think what also needs to happen is there needs to be a real change in mindset. As Sadia was saying, as Sadia was saying, we like green schoolyards can no longer be looked at as a luxury. Right. These are necessities in how we raise our children and how we take care of our communities. So there needs to be a change in prioritization on all levels of government, and with funding follows prioritization. So that is what we need to do on all levels of government.
So any additional thoughts that you have for folks, or any points you'd want to get across about the benefits of green and sustainable schoolyards?
Yeah, actually, just to build off of Kenneth's point right there, when we're talking about prioritization at the local level, we have data at the census tract levels, and we need to think about that level of specificity when we take that deep dive and where green schoolyards need to go, right? Where are those historically underserved, disinvested communities? And there's been data for ages, and we need action to start moving that needle forward. So prioritization, not just at the school level, quite literally at the school level, is really key. And yeah, climate resilience, we've got health outcomes, we've got better, educational outcomes. This is such a multifaceted opportunity. there's no going wrong.
Great. Well, this has been so great having the opportunity to talk to you both. Thank you both so much for joining and sharing, talking about all the benefits of investing in green, sustainable schoolyards for climate, for health, for learning. There's really a lot that can be done out there. So really appreciate your time and look forward to staying in touch and seeing this work go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.